So, welcome to this last session of our meeting. As Sharon has already told you, we organized the afternoon, including all the papers scheduled, and so we will have 5 papers, I think, in the afternoon. So 4. We should be 4. Yes. 4. But insomma, anyway, they are a lot, and so we can start now. And the first speaker of the session is not with us, but we have with us Mario La Rosa, our second speaker. And Mario La Rosa is finishing his PhD in Padua, and is interested in music archaeology. He worked on the Aulos from the Giglio ship, and he was involved in this big project led by University of Bologna and Padua on the musical ecosystem. That means mapping all the object of musical interest kept in the museum in the northeast Italy. And today is presenting some result of this research. An unusual idiophone for women's activities in ancient Veneto. Please, Mario.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here with you in Vilnius, and thanks to the Professor Castaldo for the presentation. And I want also to thank Sharunas and his collaborators to organize this wonderful event. So, I will present today part of my PhD research, and this is about an idiophone for women's activities in ancient Veneto. So, when we think of music in ancient Veneto, the titular art immediately comes to mind. In this artistic tradition, male figures are typically depicted playing 3 main types of musical instruments: horns, syrinx or panpipes, and the particular typologies of string instrument with asymmetrical arms and curved crossbar, as you can see from the slide. The iconography often shows 2 noblemen facing each other, each playing their instrument in banquet scenes, perhaps playing together or engaged in a musical contest. These representations on the situle date between the 7th and the 5th centuries BCE. From this iconography, it appears that music making was an exclusively male activity. But what about women? On the situla from tomb 244 of Montebelluna, we find a depiction of 2 women facing each other while preparing wool. With their right hands raised, they hold distaffs, while spindles are shown at the end of threads they are twisting with their left hands. Now I would like to focus on this detail, because from funerary context of the ancient Veneti, such as the rich necropolis of Este and Montebelluna, we find tubular artifacts interpreted as distaff scepters, or scepters tintinnabula, so named because some of them contain sounding material inside. These so-called scepters are among the most curious realia of the metallurgical production of the ancient Veneti. They are often found in female grave goods, associated with other items such as spindle whorls, bobbins, and spindles. From the 8th century BCE onward, their function has always been linked to wool and textile production. They are cylindrical objects clad in metal sheeting and often feature rich embossed decoration. In this context, we consider them for their potential sonorous component. In this map, as you can see, there are the pre-Roman necropolises where sound-related scepters have been found in Veneto. So, the necropoli of Cavarzano in Belluno, the necropoli of Pian della Gneva in Pieve d'Alpago, the necropoli of Posmon in Montebelluna, and then the three necropolises of Casa Alfonsi, Casa di Ricovero, and Fondo Nazzari in Este, near Padua. So, the first specimen I would like to show you was found in the tomb 13 of the Venetic necropolis of Casa Alfonsi in Este, dated to the mid-6th centuries before BCE. It's a tubular bronze artifact reported in the volume Monumenti Antichi by Bianchi and Capuis as a sound-producing object, a scepter tintinnabulum. It consists of a bronze sheet cylinder around a wooden core with two convex discs at the top, containing small rattling pieces. The discs are made from double bronze sheets with overlapping edges. The entire scepter is finally decorated with animal and geometrical motifs. At the top, a schematic bird figure cut out of metal crowns the piece. The artifact is 17.5 centimeters long, with disc measuring 7.3 centimeters in diameter. The discs are well preserved, though the body of the object is highly fragmentary, making it extremely fragile. Another probable sound-producing item, likely part of a similar scepter, and now preserved at the Museum Nazionale a Testino, is a small bronze disc with pendants. It comes from the necropolis of Casa di Ricovero, though the exact tomb is unknown, and it's catalogued as a sporadic material. The disc measures 4.7 centimeters in diameter and consists of two overlapping bronze sheets. There is a central hole, and the edges are pierced with four small rings supporting metal pendants. The disc is decorated with dots and circles. A comparison can be made with a spinning top-shaped element from the 6th century BCE, discovered in the tomb 6 of Pian dell'Agnella necropolis in Pieve d'Alpago. This circular object with a central hole and a perforated edge has 9 small rings with attached globular pendants. Its lower face features a small perforated cylinder, perhaps to insert a tubular element. This too is thought to have belonged to a scepter tintinnabulum. Thanks to this comparison, these sound-producing pendants can be dated to the 6th century BCE. Further evidence of the sonic relevance of such scepters comes from similar items from the Museum of Montebelluna and Belluno. The scepter from the tomb 410 in the Posmon necropolis of Montebelluna dated to the early 5th century BCE, and is 27.2 centimeters long and 1.2 centimeters in diameter. It is made of bronze sheeting and decorated with geometric patterns. Both ends feature 5 small rings in various states of preservation, each supporting another ring with 3 pendants, now concreted and no longer move. A useful comparison is the scepter from the tomb 1865-3 in the Cavarzano necropolis of Belluno, dated to the second half of the 6th century BCE. Although fragmentary and lacking any internal sonic elements, one preserved end includes a suspension ring with 2 pendants, echoing the Montebelluna artifact. Coming back to the Montebelluna, curiously, if shaken, the Montebelluna scepter produced sound, likely from small stones inside. Since both ends are intact, these were intentionally inserted. The artifact may have had a double sound-producing feature, external pendants and internal elements activated by shaking. It is an idiophone with at least 2 types of sound, which would be remarkable especially if one assumes a dual function of these scepters. On the one hand, in fact, they can be considered in their ritual dimension, related to the funerary sphere, and their sound could therefore emphasize some moments of the funeral rite, or rhythmically accompany the procession in honor of the deceased. On the other hand, they can also be associated with an everyday use related to the working sphere. Now let's listen to the sound of the scepter. We should not forget the other main context in which these scepters appear, the spinning and waving activities of Venetic women. Other sound-producing tools strengthen this link. Bronze distaff, similar to Etruscan examples, found in the Fondo Nazari necropolis of Este, and dated to the late 7th century BCE. These are unmistakably distaffs, with a typical shape, a bronze tube with an enlarged top for securing the wool mass. Experienced archaeologists such as Angela Ruta Serafini confirmed that shaking one of these distaff's heads produced sound. So at least one of these two distaffs served both as a work tool and as a rattle, providing a rhythmic accompaniment to women's work. Both the scepters and the distaffs will be subjected to diagnostic investigations in order to document their sound production aspects. These activities, which have already been carried out for other finds of interest, are planned within the framework of the National Inter-University Research Program, FRIN, MUSE, Musical Ecosystem of Ancient Northern Italy, in which the universities of Padua and Bologna are involved and whose PI is Professor Paola Dessì. The role of women in ancient manufacturing is evident, though underrepresented in written sources. Archaeology can fill this gap using artifacts for reconstructing aspects of the ancient world. Technical knowledge in the past was acquired through practice and involves all the senses. Sound from the scepter distaffs could help to repeat gestures, creating a mind-body connection. Indeed, knowledge lives not only in the mind, but also in the hands, and sound stimuli can guide the action. Workers themselves often sing or play music to increase the speed of the work, to stave off boredom, to keep each other company, or simply for enjoyment. Not by chance, links between music and textile work appear in ancient iconography and literature. One of the most important examples is the tintinnabulum from Tomba degli Ori in Bologna, dated to the mid-7th century BCE. This object is notable for both its artistic value and iconography, portraying aristocratic women overseeing household textile activities. Being a potential sound-producing object, it may represent one of the earliest links between music and women's labor. The debate on its function continues. The term tintinnabulum derives from the belief that these were idiophones struck with mallets, like tiny gongs. The prevailing view today is that they were ceremonial pendants, symbols of prestige, worn by elite women. A further example comes from the Eastern Hallstatt world, a funerary biconical vessel from Tumulus 27 in the Sopron necropolis in Hungary, dated to the 7th-6th centuries BCE. It shows a woman at a large loom beside a musician playing a stringed instrument. This is no casual pairing. In spinning workshops, sound was ever present. Consider, for example, the deep, rhythmic thud of the loom and the swinging of the loom weights. Textile labor was hard, and even in pre-Roman times, women may have accompanied this rhythm with sound-producing tools or with songs. Indeed, work songs, in Italian canti delle filandere, were documented at least until the 60s and the 70s of the 20th century in many Italian regions, including Veneto. Female textile workers were led by a woman, the so-called giratora, whose specific role was to pace the work through music and songs. So, we might very cautiously imagine that even the wealthy women of ancient Veneto, like the modern giratore, used scepters, distaffs, to lead and pace the work of others. These scepters would then symbolize feminine authority and for this reason be buried with their owners to underline their social role. The scepter distaffs may be interpreted as symbolic rods of command. This instrument, along with other sound-producing artifacts of pre-Roman Veneto, which I'm currently studying for my doctoral research, describe a soundscape that stands alongside the purely male musical practice that can be deduced from the iconographic analysis of the situle art. It is not manifested through the depiction of musical instruments, but through objects found in archaeological context, which were not built with the primary function of making sound, but which nevertheless produce a sound and can therefore be considered idiophones. The study of these realia enriches our knowledge about the musical culture of the ancient Veneti with new data pertaining to the female sphere, ranging from various contexts, from work and from the practices of spinning and waving to daily life, from dance to ceremonial context, also linked with two rites of passage. Thank you.
Thank you. I come to take the microphones. Yes. Thank you, Mario. It was very, very interesting. Even the concept to provide an overview of this sound object, and you see we are completely, we are very far from our very structured musical instruments like lyre, like auloi, like carnix. And it is very important to provide this idea of this sonorous ecosystems in antiquity, and even since we don't, as you know, we have so few sources, so yes. It is very interesting this, and thank you. I don't know if someone has any question to Mario, for Mario. Stefan.
Yeah, thank you. This opens up a lot of questions.
Good.
Two quick ones. One is connected to weight. If you compare wooden distaff to one of those metal objects, would the later be of about the same weight? Because that greatly impacts on practicality of the whole thing. And another question perhaps. You showed those rattling things with a tube which was closed. Mm-hmm. Was this closed afterwards? So was it cast or was it rolled and sealed so they could insert the...
Okay, so about the first question is the comparison between this that had the sound material inside and some other distaffs that were found in this necropolis. Yes, I mean, unfortunately, most of these scepters are without the ends. So the weight, of course, when for example, the Montebelluna that had both ends preserved, has more weight than the other bronze distaffs. So yes, more or less the weight is similar, but of course when you have the complete instrument, the weight is a bit more, yes, there is a little difference. About the production of these sceptres, they are with a bronze sheet, and that was then, how can I say, folded, yes, around a wood structure. So then it is possible to hypothesis that then that were put inside the sounding elements, and then they were completely closed with the both ends. And sometimes, like we saw in some examples, on these ends there were also some other pendants. So my hypothesis is that they had a double function and even a double sound. Now for the specimen from Montebelluna, if shaken, as you heard, you can listen to the sound of something that is inside, but unfortunately all the pendants outside doesn't play, that doesn't make a sound anymore because they are concreted.
Can I add just something? That it is interesting, even since these scepters are not common. It is something like votive. The destination is votive. So from one end, it is not used every day for the everyday activities. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, they put inside this small stones or something to sound when shaken. So this is very interesting. Is even the concept that they put this even for a non-real object.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
And I didn't present today, but there will be also some other occasions.
No, I know that it is
because
very
there are some any other examples from Veneto. For example, there are also some armille, some bracelet that they were buried in some tomb, and they have inside some stones. Yes, so it is not the only example from ancient Veneto with of these sounding tools.
So, we are waiting for the publication of your dissertation.
Thank you.
I don't know if there is some more question. Yes? Yes.
That was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. How do I?
Hold it. That's all.
Okay, I'm technology incompetent. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I learned so much that I did not know. This is a question purely from ignorance, so forgive me if this is incredibly basic. You mentioned these giratori. So how does this practically function? You said the leaders would be the ones who have these instruments. Are they the ones who are doing the work at the same time? Like how do you have the instruments and do the work?
So I want to show you the depiction on the Montebelluna situla. So this is one of these depiction of the ancient Veneto situla with two women that are spinning the wool, and my thing that I told about giratore, it's only a comparison that we have to be very cautious to say it, because giratora is a very modern concept. But inside these industries of the 20th century, there was this woman who was leading by starting some songs, some music, and giving rhythm to the other workers. So this was my idea, that maybe because these scepters are found in rich graves of women of the ancient Veneto, maybe they can also have a leading role in this manufacturing process. And this is also, for example, in some archaeologists interpreted this depiction of the two women with, at the right, one leading woman that she is teaching how to work to the woman on the left, because she is, as you can see, it may be pregnant. So she is a young woman with an old lady, and this is like a teaching scene. Of course, it's an interpretation of some archaeologists, but could be also an hypothesis.
Yes, thank you, Mario, and thank you, and yes, yes.
Thank you.
So now is the turn of Kamila Wysłucha, who is she's online. Eh? Yes, yes. Kamila Wysłucha is giving providing her paper online, and she is a PhD. She has a PhD in classics from the University of Wrocław, and she is involved in a project on the studies of some Auloi. Now she's involved in this project together with Stefan for the study of the Auloi from the Museum of Naples. And today she is speaking about the Aulos and Roman musical identity at the dawn of the Imperial period. Yes.
Many thanks to Sharunas and all the organizers whom I unfortunately haven't met for bringing MOISA so far beyond the Mediterranean and to such a lovely place, which I've always dreamed of seeing. That's why I regret not being with all of you there. I also would like to apologize for the quality of my voice, which isn't great today, but I hope I'll manage to talk for the next 20 minutes. So let's get to it. Despite what we might call the bad press the Aulos had received since its mythical rejection in classical Athens, the instrument's cultural prominence was acknowledged in Latin literary sources, which represented it as a distinctly Roman symbol by the end of the 1st century BC. In this presentation, I'd like to trace the path that led to this transformation of the image of the Aulos, drawing on a range of sources and testimonies. To begin with, I think it's important to emphasize that the criticism directed at the Aulos, particularly by Athenian philosophers, never really threatened its strong cultural position. The instrument was never relegated from its performative context, nor did it lose its popularity. What changed, or perhaps was reflected in the criticism, was the status of its players, the shift from amateurs to paid professionals. Whether this shift influenced the playing technique or the musical style is a question open to debate. But for now, what matters for my argument is this. The Aulos remained the most prominent wind instrument from the archaic period well into late antiquity. What it did change was its image in literature that reflected to a certain degree its cultural status. What I'd like to explore is how this long-standing prominence was eventually appropriated into Roman cultural identity, especially during the transition from republic to empire. This development, I suggest, is particularly evident in literary sources from the Augustan period. Unlike in classical Athens, Roman authors acknowledged and even celebrated the Aulos as a leading musical instrument and a potent religious symbol. In the first part of my talk, I'll focus on the Aulos' actual role within Roman culture. In the second, I'll have a look in what way this role was represented in Latin literary sources. The instrument's socio-cultural significance is strikingly captured in a passage from Ovid's Fasti, where the significance simply means the number of performative contexts that featured its music. Here, the presence of the tibia, well, the aulos obviously, is so deeply embedded in daily Roman life that its absence seems to threaten the very order of society. This passage highlights the use of the aulos in sacred rituals, theatrical performances, and funerals. We can also add weddings and, as I'll discuss later, domestic sacrificial rites. Taken together, such passages strongly suggest that no other instrument featured more prominently in the ritual soundscape of Roman daily life. Even the cithara, which through its association with Apollo Kitharoides symbolized Augustan power and stood in opposition to Marcus Antonius, imagined as Marsyas, played a far less visible role in everyday religious practice. The omnipresence of the aulos in both ritual and entertainment contexts is also reflected in visual culture, even if ancient iconography never in fact aimed for literal realism. To support this, I'll briefly refer to the frequency of aulos depictions in Pompeian visual sources and to the number of archaeological finds dating approximately from the 1st century CE. While I don't take statistics as a definitive proof, I do think they offer at least a rough sense of the instrument's cultural footprint. Of course, one might question how representative Pompeii is of Roman culture more broadly and whether there were notable differences between Rome and Pompeii in terms of aulos culture. My working assumption is that there weren't. At least we currently have no evidence to suggest that Pompeii was exceptional in this regard. So let's turn to archaeology and statistical evidence. According to Mellini's catalogs, 69 aulos fragments have been recovered from Pompeian excavations, such as these ones. I would argue that the real number is likely much higher. Many finds, I suspect, simply haven't been catalogued. Even so, this figure already stands out when compared to 34 documented sistra, like these ones, and 9 cymbalum finds. Of course, we have to keep in mind that many other popular instruments like lyres, frame drums, and harps were made from perishable materials, leaving almost no trace once they were buried. The archaeological evidence for those consists of just a single cithara tuning peg and a handful of objects resembling plectra. If we take a skeptical view of the archaeological data statistics, we can turn to iconography. Here we find 95 depictions of the aulos shown in performative context. For instance, these ones, a number surpassed only by 112 images of tympana, which, however, often served as a decorative motif in wall painting. Following that are 84 images of cithara and 70 of the lyra. Now, these numbers without context tell us very little. Many of the depictions are mythological, and those may have had little, if anything, to do with contemporary musical practices. But there is one particular category of images I think deserves more attention. It's a group of Pompeian aulos depictions that has largely gone unnoticed, or at least unanalyzed as a meaningful iconographic type. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the famous fresco showing a sacrificial rite accompanied by an aulos player. In this case, the aulos is Phrygian. What's less well known is that this appears to be the most frequently occurring motif involving the aulos in surviving Pompeian iconography, surviving and not surviving. At least 32 depictions of a tibican assisting a sacrifice have been identified in domestic contexts in Pompeii. Since many of these were left in situ, most are now lost. The ones that survived tended to be located in sheltered areas, atria or kitchen corners, where bits of roofs remained to protect them from elements. And so the three ones together with the fourth in the museum are the only ones I found that are still around. There are several recorded in drawings from the 19th century and early 20th century photos. What makes these images so extraordinary is that unlike the mythological scenes, they may have reflected real life almost like a mirror. The rites they show, whether sacrifices or ordinary household prayers, were often carried out directly in front of them beside the lyraria. Even more interesting is the fact that these images appear in houses across social spectrum. They vary greatly in artistic quality, reflecting a broad range of household wealth. This suggests that the sound of the aulos and the presence of a tibican was familiar across many social strata. The music was not a luxury, it was part of everyday religious life. But what kind of musical practice do these depictions actually represent? Were most households home to a tibican with a pair of pipes, or were professional musicians brought in for religious ceremonies whenever they took place? Did every domestic sacrifice at the lyrarium include a tibican? Probably not, since we do have visual representations of sacred rites without them. Still, as I'll later show, the aulos accompaniment was often considered indispensable. And even if these images represent only the most solemn or idealized celebrations, they must reflect reality to a great degree. Can we extend this to Rome and to the wider Roman world shaped by its religious culture? When it comes to the city itself, I would say yes, definitely. This is supported by the very existence of a Roman trade union for ritual tibicinas, the Collegium Tibicinum Romanorum. So while it may already be obvious that the aulos held an important position among Roman instruments, I believe these domestic images show something more. They reveal just how deeply embedded aulos music was in the sacred rituals that defined Roman culture. And by extension, they reveal how much the daily soundscape of Roman life was shaped by ritual sound. In the second part of my presentation, I'd like to argue that the significant role of the aulos was also reflected in Augustan literature, where the instrument came to function as a cultural symbol. This symbolic status, I believe, was achieved largely through the fictionalization of Rome's past. Myths and legends were crafted or adapted to portray the aulos as an indispensable presence in the city's history. Two well-known passages from Latin literature illustrate this clearly. I've already referred to the first one in the context of performative roles at the beginning of my presentation, and this is the description of Quinquatrus Minusculi festival in Book 6 of Ovid's Fasti. The second is Horace's famous reference to the dramatic tibia in his Ars Poetica. I've analyzed both texts in my previous publications, but today I'd like to revisit them from a slightly different angle. The story Ovid recounts about the voluntary exile and return of the pipers to the city of Rome aims not only at explaining the origin of the religious festival Quinquatrus Minusculi, but also the role of the pipers in various ceremonies performed in the city. We may also assume that the protagonists of the story, the city pipers, belonged to a guild of musicians whose headquarters must have been Aides Minervae, the temple of the patroness of arts and crafts. My main focus here, though, is not the guild of musicians, but the role of the aulos in civic religion as portrayed in Ovid's account. The episode is set in an undefined legendary past. Based on Livy's version of the story, it can be dated to the late 4th century BCE, but the inconsistencies between the four main versions of this tale throw both the dating and the historicity of the event into doubt. That said, Ovid makes no pretense of historical accuracy from the outset. The story has the character of a legend. What's important is that the tibia in this legendary narrative accompanied sacred rites, theatrical games, and funerals. Its presence was considered so essential that when it disappeared, the city's authorities were willing to make concessions simply to bring it back. Interestingly, Ovid's focus in this passage is not so much the pipers themselves, who are, after all, the main protagonists of the story, but on the instrument. And this is something it shares with the passage from Ars Poetica. Both passages highlight the tibia and its music rather than the musicians, and both located in a mythicized, barely defined past. Now, Horace's Ars Poetica predates Ovid's vastly, but I wouldn't argue for any conscious intertextual reference. What we can observe, however, is that Horace takes the fictionalization of the past even further. He draws a close parallel between the nature of the instrument and the moral character of Rome's early inhabitants, or at least what he imagines them to have been. The tibia is presented as a simple, modest instrument lacking the ornate metal encasing that must have characterized its construction in Horace's own time. In the same way, the people are portrayed as few in number, austere and morally upright, not yet corrupted by luxury. This vision echoes the famous idea attributed to Damon that the laws of music cannot change without changes in the laws of the state, or the other way around. Indeed, in the following verses, Horace shows both music and morality shifting towards sophistication, a contrast that implicitly criticizes the presumed decadence of his own age. We may, of course, question the degree of historical awareness in Horace's account. Does he refer to a specific period in Rome's history? How much did he or his audience really know about the city's musical past? It's certainly true that Rome's population must have been once smaller, its theatres more modest, and the design of its instruments simpler. But unfortunately, we lack archaeological evidence for such early double pipes in the Roman-Latin context. All archaeological evidence for such early double pipes come from Greek environment, such as these ones, for instance, while Etruscan iconography attests to their use in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. That, of course, fits well with the widespread belief that the Aulos, along with its performative context, was adopted by the Romans from the Etruscans, who in turn may have taken it from the Greeks. So this is the simple, let's call it tibia, I mean, not so simple, but still. And this is the Pompeian context, but this design might have been around already earlier in Horace's times, as our other finds attest. And this is Vesuvian, Stabian iconography showing a more sophisticated kind of aulos, definitely, or perhaps made of metal, like the trumpet. Yes, so to support my argument for a historicizing narrative in Ars Poetica, it's enough to conclude that there must have been some awareness of how the aulos had evolved over time. In this way, both Horace and Ovid's passages portray the instrument as intrinsically bound to the city's past, however fictionalized the past may be. Together, they help construct a shared memory in which Rome depends on the aulos for the proper performance of its sacred rituals, while the moral fiber of its citizens seems to echo music it produces. We might ask whether these two passages are isolated cases in the celebration of the instrument within Roman religion. Admittedly, references to the aulos and its music are widespread in the literature of the Principate and early Imperial period. Various myths and legends involving the instrument, especially Athena's rejection of it and the contest between Marsyas and Apollo, are frequently explored, so the so-called new music myths are very much around. In Augustan elegy, the aulos even emerges as the elegiac instrument par excellence, associated with both funeral and wedding songs. Still, I would argue that Horace's and Ovid's texts are unique. Both are deeply reflective poems that engage critically with Roman culture. In Ovid's Fasti, this reflection goes even further, encompassing questions of religious identity and collective memory. Based on everything we've seen so far, if I were to compare the presence of the Aulos in classical Athens and early Imperial Rome, I'd say that the performative contexts were broadly similar. But when it comes to the attitudes expressed in contemporary literature, Rome clearly offered the Aulos a form of cultural recognition it never fully received in Athens, particularly in its role in sacred rites, which was acknowledged and even celebrated in Latin literary sources. In Athens, as we know, this was a much more ambivalent matter. Let me close with a final thought about musical memory and Roman identity without venturing too far into the complexities of what that identity might have entailed. In Book 2 of Cicero's Laws, the origins of Roman in very inverted commas, music are traced back to the 3rd century BCE, to Livius Andronicus and Naevius, both dramatist composers. Here again, early historical music is described as plain and unadorned, especially in contrast to later styles marked by inflections and modulations. In this case, the past is not fictionalized, but we may still wonder how the memory of this earlier, more austere style was transmitted. Are Horace and Ovid perhaps referring to this musical past in their texts? And I'm going to end on this note, as I have more questions than answers for you, I'm afraid. And I really don't know what specific musical pasts, if any, Horace and Ovid are referring to. What was Roman or Latin or whomever the Latin poets represent musical identity from the perspective of these passages. So if you have any ideas or clues, I will be very happy to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamila. And very interesting this overview, even in this case, and about the meaning of the tibia in Roman, and it let us think about how even in Roma is different the conception than in Greek word, and how there is some particularity that yes, they came out from your research. So I don't know if there are any questions for Kamila. Yes.
Thank you for a really interesting and wonderful talk. I know very, very little about the tibia in Rome, but it just crossed my mind the professionalization of Aulos players in kind of late 5th century Athens was viewed very negatively, as they were kind of non-Athenian. And I'm just kind of curious, because it was the tibia is on put such a pedestal in Rome. Did that filter down at all? Like, did it affect its perception at all?
Excuse me, I can't hear you very well, but are you asking if the fact that professionals played the tibia rather than Romans, or did this influence its image? Is this your question?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, I think by the time of the Ovid and Horace, it was a couple of centuries when the Aulos was already played by professionals. So I can't really see this. If you look at the images I have shown from Pompeii, very often the Aulos player is depicted as smaller. And we know that servants, slaves were depicted in this way, like smaller versions of people, and gods were a bit bigger. This happened already in Pompeii, and then in later iconography, this was very frequent. So actually, this must have been a fact that slaves or servants played them, and I don't think this really influenced the reputation of the instrument, especially in the religious context. The members of the Collegium Tibicinum Romanorum were often either slaves or freedmen, as our epigraphic records show. Yet the Collegium really enjoyed a lot of good status because they were providing ritual music, which was so useful for the city.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Sorry, I move here. Can I add a very trivial consideration, super trivial, but I was always intrigued by this idea of the auloi tibiae as in a negative way, and and the contrast between this idea and how much they are spread and used. It is a kind of yes, it is the instruments in sometimes in some centuries, and so this always intrigued me because yes, it is very trivial, but anyway, you see the contrast between this concept and how much they are documented.
Yes, so actually this contrast also intrigued me. That's why I prepared that presentation, and I think that maybe this is not only my opinion, but basically I think the idea is that in Athens, Aristotle and Plato criticized the tibia just in certain contexts, and Plato basically says, if I were to organize a state, I wouldn't include this and this scale, and I wouldn't include modulating Aulos, but it doesn't mean that he wouldn't like this in Athenian society, and that Aristotle doesn't think they contribute to education, moral education, and so on. So this is like, the criticism is just of certain aspects, not the instrument as a whole, I think, and it's only restricted to those texts. So I think this did not influence, as I tried to emphasize in my presentation, did not influence the performative context. It didn't mean that tibia stopped being played or Aulos in Athens because it received such bad press from some philosophers.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. There are any questions? More? Maybe not. So we can thank Kamila now. Thank you. And we can now we can go on with the following speaker. We will move to the string instruments with Fábio Vergara Cerqueira. And Fábio Vergara Cerqueira is full professor of ancient history at the Federal University of Pelotas in Brazil. And he was even the president of the Brazilian Society of Classical Studies. But Fábio is very often here in Europe because he was in Europe with some very prestigious fellowship like the Humboldt Foundation Fellowship, the French school. It was had a stay at the French school in Rome, and is interested in several topics, and among them even the iconography on South Italian pottery, the musical iconography, of course. And today he will speak about lyra and the rectangular cithara as identity signs in Tarentum and Apulia. The dynamics and symbolism of musical instruments from the late archaic to the early Hellenistic period. Fabio, you are there, isn't it? Yes, I saw him. Yes, hi.
Hi, how are you? Daniela, thanks for the presentation.
Fantastico.
I'm very happy to participate, although I would be much happier if I would be with you. It's not to take part at the meeting, being at home and with all things that have to do if we don't get to accompany the meeting. Yes. So musical instruments, in addition to their specific sound classifications, carry important cultural symbols linked to the social memories associated with them, which are dynamic symbols that undergo change that accompany cultural transformations and historical circumstances. Some instruments are elevated to an important position as symbol of ethnic and political identity. Alcibiades, who in his youth rejected lessons in Aulos, is known for his speech when he argued that this art, the art of the Aulos, belonged to the Thebans, and the Athenians, on the other hand, had the lyre, which allowed speech while playing. This testimony exemplifies how the lyre in Athens has a strong political symbolism of belonging to a common cultural identity. In the case of Tarentum, the late 16th century coins and terracotta reliefs with reclining male figures of banqueters indicate that the lyre, associated with the colony's founding narratives, myths as the myth of Zakynthos and Apollo, had an identity value that referred to the Spartan origin of the Greek colonizers. However, throughout the 4th century, significant cultural change occurred in Magna Graecia in general, and so did it in Tarentum and Apulia, so that we can see two instruments becoming possible identity signs. First, the Apulian rectangular cithara, and second, the Apulian cithrum. I won't talk anything about the Apulian cithrum, both known basically from the iconographic record. We can establish this definition based on a systematic study of the vase painting of around 100 vases in the case of the rectangular cithara, and around 200 in the case of the Apulian cithrum, reinforced by the evidence of choroplastics. At the turn of the century, faced with the crisis that shook Tarentum due to the Roman advance as a form of resistance, 4th to 3rd century, cultural identity was animated by an archaizing feeling. The feeling of belonging to the Greek cultural tradition became stronger, as opposed to the regional identity that predominated throughout the 4th century. In this way, the lyre once again assumes a strong identity value, as witnessed by the thousands of examples of Zakynthos terracotta figurines with lyre or cithara, linked to a rite of passage of great importance in this period. A few decades later, going on the 3rd century, coins minted in Brindisi, and Oria in the 3rd century show how much the rectangular cithara was consolidated in the memory of the region as a symbol of cultural identity. So this was the resume of my presentation. First, the location of Tarentum in South Italy, sharing geography with Apulian region, composed by Messapian, Pelcacian, and Daunian regions. Yes. So Taras, a colony of Sparta, and indigenous Apulian peoples. A colonial city like Tarentum, founded by the Spartans in 706 in southern Italy, is culturally shaped by a combination of different identity references. On the one hand, the memory among the descendants of the founding colonies of a Spartan cultural heritage, not always positive, which was reshaped and redefined over time. On the other hand, the cultural values developed by the Greek community of the colonial city itself over centuries. And finally, a varying degree of influence from the regional culture of non-Greek peoples who inhabited the Apulian region at different times, especially the three micro-regions of Messapia, Pelcasia, and Daunia, and who formed with the Tarentine people a kind of Apulian Tarentine koine during the 4th century. The material culture and iconography demonstrate a process of transculturation, generating a culture with a heterogeneous identity anchorage. We will try to verify the identity oscillation from the point of view of the diachrony pointing out moments in which they resort more to the Spartan heritage or more to local and regional values, whether Greek or non-Greek. So, about the foundation of Tarentum. The founder of Tarentum, the so-called oikistes, was Phalantos, and the colonizers were the so-called Partheniae, a word that refers to their problematic birth condition, which led them to become atimoi Spartans without effective citizenship rights. The place for the establishment of the colony was indicated by the oracle of Apollo as a solution to the political crisis that was taking place in Sparta at that time. In the chosen location, there was a village identified as Satyrion, parallel to the legend that attributed the founding of Tarentum to the Spartan Phalatus. Another legend pointed to a local hero named Taras as its founder, who even gave his name to the city, which in ancient Greece was called Taras. He was the son of Poseidon and the nymph Satyria. This Satyria gave her name to this town, Satyrion, that existed already since before the time of the arrival of the Spartans. Being son of Poseidon demonstrates a strong connection of the inhabitants of these towns with the sea and fishing, as well as with a distant past of interrelation with the Greeks, which archaeology proves dates back to the Mycenaean period. However, we need to return to the narrative about the Spartan foundation, which some authors identify as the second Greek colonization in the region. It's necessary to revisit this, since this narrative will occupy an important place in the political and religious identity of the descendants of Greek colonizers. According to Strabo, the historian Antiochus of Syracuse stated that Partheniae were Lacedaemonians by birth, but reduced to the condition of helots for refusing to participate in the Messenian War, while for Ephorus of Cumae, they were illegitimate children of Spartans, but in either case, they were atimoi, deprived of political rights. This is why they rebelled against the citizens of Sparta under leadership of Phalantos. This generated a great crisis in the city of Sparta, as the Partheniae were in large number and believed that they had the right to full citizenship of the Spartans. According to Antiochus, a rebellion had occurred in the sanctuary of Amyclas in Laconia, a few kilometers from the center of Sparta. After the rebellion was suppressed by the Spartiates, in order to pacify the situation of the Partheniae, the Spartans had to consult the oracle of Delphi. It was Apollo, seen as the colonizing god, who indicated to them the region of the Gulf of Tarentum, where the town of Satyrion was located. Thus, practically expelled from their maternal city, which proved to be their stepmother, and led by Phalantos, they founded the colony and conquered a highly productive territory, eliminating in a few decades the native presence in this region that we identify as the Tarentine Chora. And in this Chora, on the southeast borders of the Messapians, they established the cult of the Spartan hero Iakintos, to whom was dedicated one of the great Spartan festivals, the Iakintia, whose cult in Tarentum at one point became an important rite of passage for boys as well as for girls, as evidenced by the terracotta reliefs of his twin sisters, Polybea. The cult is amply evidenced by the presence of terracotta reliefs depicting the two Spartan heroes, found on a large scale in the context of votive deposition. In Masseria del Carmen alone, there are between 3,000 and 5,000 examples. It is interesting to note that in these reliefs, the young Hyacinthus is depicted holding a stringed instrument, in accordance with mythical narrative that claimed he learned to play the lyre from his lover and teacher Apollo. So here, these 1,000 examples of these 1,000 relief figures of Iakinthus and Polybea. So next, let's talk about the terracotta reliefs depicting reclining male figures with a lyre produced in large number in Tarentum. Certainly, the most representative series of Tarentine choroplastic production of the archaic and classic periods is the figure of a banqueter reclining on a couch, supported by his left elbow and holding a small lyre or a barbitus with his left hand, or a barbitus, yes. This model was the hegemonic type in the Tarentine choroplastic for more than 2 centuries. Its production began at the end of the 16th century and continued uninterruptedly until approximately 325, when it gave way to the Tanagra types. This iconographic series has great potential for studying the place of the lyre in the Greek matrix of Tarentine cultural identity. We also want to investigate in this large series the intersection of gender and age with the representation of the lyre or the barbitus. In principle, it should point out the continuity of an iconographic scheme present in Attic vase painting from the late 16th and early 15th century, in which the barbitus is associated with adult bearded male characters and the lyre with young beardless men, since the barbitus would appear more systematically in Tarentine reliefs in hands of bearded characters. The study of the terracotta figurines representing a reclining male character in a banquet pose, holding a lyre in his left hand and often a barbitus, reveals an iconographic scheme influenced by traditions of Greek origin, especially revealing a cultural heritage from Laconia. This is a long, numerous, and fairly regular series, but which presents important variations, which occasionally include the representation of a male figure with a musical instrument, such as a Celian, or even as Dionysus, or as Dionysus Hades, occasionally with a female companion. There is no consensus on the identification and interpretation of these reliefs. Do they refer to the institution of the banquet, to a funerary projection in the afterlife, banquet at the afterlife, or to a connection with Dionysus as practiced in South Italy? Our assumption, which guides our investigation, is that this iconography carries a symbolism of the lyre linked to the practice of the banquet as a Greek identity factor, while at the same time affirming and idealizing a form of sociability preserved in the colonial polis, apoikiai, based on social and everyday patterns of Greek origin, regardless of whether it is used as a funerary purpose or connection with the iconography, or connections with Dionysianism as reworked in the context of Magna Graecia. Let's go now to the coins, the lyra, and identity projections. Tarentine began its funerary production in the last quarter of the 16th century, a time when, according to Herodotus, there was a kind of monarchy or tyranny linked to the power of the aristocracy, whose wealth was based on the agricultural exploitation of the Cora stolen from the Iapygians approximately 2 centuries earlier. The Tarentine coinage began around 510. In the first 20 years, so the last 20 years of the 16th century, they were characterized by minting coins using the incus technique, like this one you see here. From approximately 510, parallel productions of coins using the double relief technique began, which would last until 209, when, with the definitive submission to the Roman power, the city completely lost its political autonomy and the right to mint its own coin. The iconography of Tarentine coins is quite revealing of its political configurations and reconfigurations, but at the same time, of the oscillations of the identity references of the Tarentine polis. Coins minted using the incus technique were struck on only one side, thus replicating the same image in versets on the obverse and reverse, on which it was inverted. At this phase, the figure of a young man with a Kardelis lyre in his left hand and a flower in his right hand predominated. This type has been established today as representation of the Spartan hero Zakynthos, whose worship was taken by the colonizers to Tarentum at the end of the 18th century. The iconographic model present in these first Tarentine coinage dialogued with the Attic vascular iconography, Attic vase painting iconography of the same time, so that it was through an Athenian visual language that they appropriated the Spartan past. The incused Tarentine coins from here, okay. The incused Tarentine coins from the late 16th century are reminiscent of the Spartan past. At the same time, they were influenced by the Attic iconographic model. School-age boy with lyre in hand, going or coming from school. This is very repeated in Attic iconography. So this model, which symbolizes the institution of school education for young people in Athens, children of citizens, was a reference of Athenian identity, but at the same time served as a symbol of the condition of eromenos, beloved, in the pederastic relationship. The iconographic scheme of the Apulian incuso, in addition to the lyre in the hero's left hand, includes the flower in the right hand, which functioned as an attribute to indicate that the figure represented was the Spartan hero Zakynthos, due to the connection that the myth established between the circumstance of the death of the hero Zakynthos and the birth of the hyacinth flower. The iconography at the same time testifies to the political importance of the figure of the hero Zakynthos for the Tarentine Poliadic community, and in particular for the hegemonic aristocratic elite at that time of the monarchy or tyranny in the 16th century and first decades of the 15th century. Furthermore, it highlights how much the lyre had an emblematic symbol value in Tarentum in the affirmation of local political and cultural identity. A second type of incuse appeared in the last decade of 16th century and alternated with the previous one, represented in place of Zakynthos the Spartan founding hero Salento, without the flower, advances seated on the dolphin, again the dolphin, referring to the role of Apollo and the oracle of Delphi in the colonizing enterprise. And the systematic iconography of heroization of Salento was inspired by models propagated by Attic vascular imagery, idealizing him as an ephebe. Sorry. The iconographic scheme of representation of Zakynthos and Salento were very similar and had in common the dolphin, through which they were linked to Apollo, so that there was ambiguity in the figure of the young man on the dolphin on the Tarentine coins of this period. The double relief coinage technique began around 510. The first of this example here is double, it's not incused, the example you see here. The first phase of this technique, which lasted until approximated 408, 470, the first phase, was characterized by the figure of Salento as an insignia written on the reverse, with, for example, the nymph Satyria represented on the obverse, or a hippocampus, reinforcing the connection with the sea. As can be seen, according to the numismatic chronology of Taranto, the representation of Zakynthos as a national insignia cult became weakened, so that in the first quarter of the 15th century, the representation of Salento on a dolphin prevailed on both sides of the coins. In either case, the political identity of Tarentine elites were reinforced by the link with a common Spartan memory. It is interesting to note that the representation of Zakynthos with the lyre as an iconographic attribute links him to the form of worship practiced at the time in Amyclas of a young hero protected by Apollo. In 473, 20,000 Iapygi attacked Tarentum, the native people, which at the end of the conflict was initially weakened. Tarentum became weaker, experiencing enormous population losses, especially among the elite, and resulting in a certain reduction of its quota, which was then walled from then on. This military clash has shaken its previous aristocratic political regime, and a new democratic political order emerged, influenced by Athenian institutions, which led to a moderate democracy. The constitutional evolution of Tarentum was stimulated by Athenian example, even though the cities did not maintain friendly relationships in several circumstances. For example, during the Peloponnesian War, when Tarentum approached Sparta. In this new context of weakening aristocratic hegemony and the rise of democratic force, a situation that prevailed in Tarentum between 473 and 367, after the victory of local forces over the Italic peoples who threatened regional hegemony, the representation of Philatos Oikistes as founder of the Oikia, the colony of Tarentum, was progressively replaced by the image of Taras. The image of Taras, the local founding hero, son of Poseidon, and also the nymph Satyria that you see here, a figure reminiscent of the memory of pre-colonization local communities. Tara was also the memory of people who were there already and of popular people. In this substitution, however, the same figurative scheme used to represent Phalanthos was maintained, scheme of hero on a dolphin, which would then be compatible with the late report attributed by Pollux to Aristotle that Aristotle would have identified the figure of the eponymous hero Taras on a dolphin as the symbol of the city. Around 480-470, a new monetary type emerged, marked by the representation of the so-called Taras Oikistes, at the same time rooting in more local autochthonous belonging than in the discourse of Spartan origins. It seems that Phalanthos was more linked to
Let's
an
hope for the best.
Sorry?
We are holding on.
Can you repeat? Go on.
Yes, now we can see you and
Okay.
all right.
It seems that Phalanthos was more linked to an aristocratic identity belonging, while Taras aroused a more popular feeling, more linked to the fishing and manufacturing social circles. From this moment on, the advancement of the symbolism of Taras occurred to the detriment of the iconographic references alluding either to the veneration of Iakintos or to the political identity meaning of Phalanthos and the Spartanity. This tendency would prevail, at least based on material and iconographic evidence, for about a century and a half. Let's now talk about ethic parallels, but let's jump this. So here, let's now talk about the rectangular cithara and the affirmation of an Apulian Tarentine regional identity. Apulian pottery is one of the most important sources of musical iconography from the 4th century. More than 1,000 vases depict musical instruments. The representation of musical instruments on Apulian vases, both red figure vase done in the traditional Attic technique and the vase overpainted in the polychromic Venetian style, therefore repay close attention. This iconography is a very important source for the study of the changes that occurred in the musical culture during this 4th century in regard to the morphology of the instruments and the way and context in which they were used. A rectangular cithara emerged as a regional phenomenon in South Italy, mainly in Tarentum and the surrounding region of Apulia. In this context, the iconography of Apulian vases testifies for the first time to this new form of a stringed instrument. At first sight, it appears to have a rectangular shape with straight and parallel arms and an approximately rectangular soundboard. The Apulian context offers plenty of visual evidence of these instruments, above all in vase painting, but also in terracotta figurines, votive discs, and coins. On the other hand, notwithstanding its presence in figured monuments from other regions of southern Italy and Sicily, it is scarcely found outside Apulia and seems to have arrived in these areas thanks to contacts with southeast Italy. And it's clear in a few companion vases attributed by Trendall to the so-called Apulianizing group. Outside Italy, it occurs very rarely in works later than the first occurrences in Apulia. Supported by the evidence of its archaeological data, researchers who have studied musical instruments in Magna Graecia have considered the instrument to be a local development of the lyre cithara family. Through the observation of archaeological evidence, I can infer a chronology of the iconographic representation of the Apulian rectangular cithara. It appears first on Apulian red figure vase around 360, on vase attributed to progressive painter. Then it migrates a couple of years later to other Apulian iconographical objects, initially to the Dignatia vases, then to terracotta figurines and discs. Later, it appears in Campania and Sicily thanks to cultural and commercial exchanges between Tarentum and the indigenous Apulian centers and other Greek and non-Greek Hellenized regions in southern Italy and Sicily. Based on evidence of a catalog composed of more than 100 Apulian red figure and Dignatia vases, and on the observation of other iconographic evidence, I propose to rename this instrument as the Apulian cithara for the following reasons. The overwhelming majority of iconographic representations of the rectangular cithara came from Apulian material. The earliest representation of the instrument occurred in Apulia, where the first depictions appear around 370-360 BC. The iconological acme of the representation of this instrument from 370 to 300 coincides with the middle and late Apulian periods in the red figure vase painting, so with the apogee of Apulian and Tarentine civilization before its decline, which was driven by the progressive Roman domination of southeast Italy. The same shape of the instrument found in Apulian vase is rarely represented after the end of 4th century, although we can identify rectangular shaped citharas derived from the Apulian cithara. The iconography of this instrument reveals a certain degree of morphological homogeneity, in contrast to the clear heterogeneity of the contemporary Hellenistic cithara. And, at least but not least, for there is a strong identification of this instrument with the social and cultural context of Apulia, so its iconography shows. So that for the most of the 4th century, this instrument played a very important role in the procession of a cultural identity shared in the context of Apulian Tarentine coine. Approaching to the end, let's talk about the lyre and the return of the Doric elements in the identity of Taranto at the end of the 4th century and the beginning of the 3rd century, what you can see in coins and in reliefs of Hyacinthus and Polybea. So, in a later context, in the last decades of the 4th century, there was a revival of the role of Doric elements in Tarentum, referenced above all in the laconic sanctuary of Amyclas, religiously supported by the evocation of the figures of Apollo and Hyacinthus as protectors, who were united in a certain way in their power in the figure of the founding hero, the Oikistes Phalanthus. So let's talk about the cult of the worship of Hyacinthus and Polybea and the Spartan identity matrix at the turn of the 3rd century BC. Here, however, it's worth returning to the analysis of the great revival mentioned previously of the Tarentine cult of Hyacinthus, combined with the cult of his twin sister Polybea at the end of the 4th century. The sets of male and female terracotta figurines identified as Hyacinthus and Polybea found in a great amount outside the walls in the Masseria del Carmen. Let's stay here. In the Masseria del Carmeni around 3,000, and in various contexts within the walls, in moderate numbers in Castel Saraceno, next to the Mar Grande, in the more central area, modern center, in the old urban area, and in varying numbers in scattered contexts in peri-urban necropolis area, such as Via Peluso, 17 reliefs, Contrada Vaccarella, 136 fragments of Zakynthos and 120 fragments of Polybea, or in Corti Vecchi on Via Miniti. All these are evidence of a period of intense worship activity dedicated to Zakynthos and Polybea, which must have extended from the last third of the 4th and the middle of the 3rd century. This evidence points to a new period of flourishing devotion to Zakynthos, dating back to the Proto-Hellenistic and early Hellenistic periods. However, unlike the evidence left by the surviving remains on the late archaic period, I mean the numismatic evidence analyzed above, there is now a combined devotion to Zakynthos and his twin sister Polybea, as witnessed in the cult held at the Amyclaio in Laconia. There are many doubts about the type of worship that occurred and what its meaning were at the specific historical moment in which it flourished, with votive graves in which ex-votos in the form of Zakynthos and Polybea figures were carefully preserved after their ritual use. Here, we will not discuss the analysis of the worship itself, but only some consideration about its identity dimension. So, the risks to Tarentum's autonomy, initially facing the strengthening of the Iapygian ethnic groups, such as Messapians, Phocaeans, Daunians, Lucanians, and Bruttians, and finally facing the Romans, who little by little conquered South Italy. This situation led the Tarentines in a different manner to revalue their Greek identity matrix. We can speak of a cultural moment of re-Spartanization or re-Laconization at the turn of the 4th and to the 3rd century. This was the political and cultural context that was expressed spiritually in strong adherence to the cult of Zakynthos and Polybea, a cult that used terracotta figures on these entities as votive offerings. In my opinion, we are not dealing here with the same Spartan belongingness feeling of the archaic period, of late archaic period, although in both situations there was an appreciation of the figure and cult of Zakynthos. This later Spartanizing nationalism bias of the archaic elites of Taras, so the Spartanizing nationalist bias of the archaic elites of Taras, who were agrarian, isolated from the indigenous world, and loyal to an aristocratic regime, which was expressed on infused coins depicting Zakynthos and Phalanthons that we saw before, differed greatly in terms of context from this Spartanism of the late 4th and early 3rd centuries. At that time, after a glorious period of regional hegemony and political and economic autonomy, Tarentum found itself weakened by the threats from the Italic peoples, the Lucans and Bruttians, and the Romans, who were expanded rapidly in the south of the peninsula. In this context, at an internally democratic Taranto, in which the popular leaders were radically opposed to the Roman advance, clung strongly to the Spartan spiritual legacy, especially from Laconia, where the sanctuary of Amyclas was located, and made the cult of Zakynthos and Polybea essentially linked to the function of a rite of passage, a strong reference in the life of the sons and daughters of Tarentine citizens. As Abruzzese Calabrese points out, there was a rediscovery of one's own laconicità, using the Italian word, a belongingness feeling to Laconia, when Tarentum asked Sparta for help, which fostered ties with the ancient metropolis, not only military ties, but also religious ones. The cult of Zakynthos then mixed elements of the concept of citizenship, ethnic identity, but also mysticism inherited from Laconian spirituality, which reinforces its adherence. So, an ancient belief guaranteed that the time of the Praetorian god Zakynthos had the power to interrupt the natural biological evolution of young people, ensuring eternal adolescence and exercising an aphrodisiac function. Thus, it is through Spartanism at this time of military security crisis in Tarentum, perceived by its citizens as a promontory. So Tarentinians perceived themselves as a promontory of Greek civilization in the face of threats from barbarians, and as they saw both indigenous and Roman peoples. So in this situation, the idea of Greek belonging is asserted through the stringent instruments. The cultural values associated with this assertion of Spartanism in the Tarentine ethnic identity are present in the iconography of terracotta reliefs of Zakynthos and Polybaea, which, in my view, reveals the central value of this cultural heritage. That is, musical education for boys, but also for girls. In the case of Zakynthos reliefs, string instruments and the plectrum are by far the most frequent attributes. And the string instruments, not the rectangular cithara, lyre, cithara, or this Hellenistic cithara. In the case of Polybaea, these attributes alternate with others. So while the hairstyle of Zakynthos, with long loose hair worn by the figure of the boy with cithara or lyre would correspond to a Hellenistic model, therefore translating a trend of the time. On the other hand, the presence of the so-called Hellenistic cithara or lyre in the hands of Zakynthos and Polybaea, in turn, must get our attention. Even if it could translate a present social practice, I mean the Hellenistic cithara, or the present practice of musical education and the use of musical in the ritual properly, it fundamentally rooted them, the Tarentines, in the tradition of Greek musical education. To conclude, two more paragraphs. It can be concluded that the cithara represented in the hands of the male and female reliefs, identified as Zakynthos and Polybaea, reminds us of the possible use of music and these stringent instruments in the ritual, as verified in the tradition of Spartan Jacinthia festival. But they also remind us, and mainly, of the musical education provided to the sons and daughters of the citizens, an institution that could already have existed at the time of the infused coin of Zakynthos with lyre, an education that constituted one of the pillars in the affirmation of the ethnic belonging to Greek culture. The symbolic emphasis on musical educations in this context would be part of this package of re-Spartanization or re-Laconization of Tarentine identity, as well as the homoerotic element implicit in the myth and iconography of Zakynthos, which in Sparta and the Doric regions, especially in Crete, constituted an important part of the education of young people. This stringent instrument in the hands of Zakynthos and Polybaea, represented in the terracotta reliefs, would allude to music and poetry as integral parts of the process of education of young people, referring to the notion of musical education as a Greek tradition, but also as an index of the refinement that would be a distinct feature of Tarentine way of life. However, the symbolic power of the rectangular Apulian cithara did not disappear. With its power to evoke the regional richness of cultural traditions, and musical ones in particular, that animated for several decades in the 4th century this Apulian Tarentine koine, we see the Apulian rectangular cithara re-emerge as an emblem on coins minted in Oria, but also in Brindisi, an ancient Mesopic settlement elevated to a Roman colony after the Pyrrhic War, 280 to 75. Many of these coins have a head of Neptune on the obverse, and on the reverse, a young man riding a dolphin holding a rectangular cithara. In this hybrid cultural context of Tarentum and Apulian region, both the lyre and the Apulian rectangular cithara play an important role as a symbol of cultural identity. The lyre, and sometimes the cithara, carries the social memories of the Greek side of their identity. Greek in general, but specifically Spartan in the case of the Tarentines, not of the Apulian peoples. Although even the Tarentines in many times received strong Athenian influence regarding culture. So the rectangular cithara, in the other hand, represents the values of their regional culture. Obrigado. Thanks for your attention. I hope that you will find
Thank you, Fabio. I think that it was very clear these issues coming from the meeting of the colonizers and indigenous people. So this special kind of cithara as you said, identity instruments. So are there any questions? No question? No, maybe. Thank you, Fabio, for this to be with us even from so far. Thank you so much. And
thanks a lot.
yes, and we can go on to give the floor to our last speaker, the last speaker of this meeting, Sandra Fleury. She is an independent scholar and working in Canada and in Paris. And her topic are ancient history and religious anthropology. And her paper today focuses on these soundscapes of these rituals, these so-called Oriental rituals, ecstatic rituals. The title is "The Booming Sound of Alien Cults and God Descriptions of Music and Sounds as a Reflection of a Cultural Perception of Greek Identity." Thank you. And are you there? Probably yes.
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 Can you hear
Welcome.
me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon in Vilnius. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere thanks to the conference organizers for granting me the opportunity to deliver my presentation remotely. I gave birth to my third child 3 weeks ago, so traveling to Vilnius was not a viable option for me. It goes without saying that, thank you. I would have greatly appreciated the opportunity to visit what appears to be a beautiful city, but above all, to meet you all in person and attend your presentation. So I hope next time I will be able to come and meet you all. Let's begin. So ancient Greek testimonies are filled with references to sounds and music. In an enlightening study titled Descendants, Auditory Aesthetics in Ancient Greece, published in 2016, Sean Allen Sundergaard explores sounds in ancient Greek texts and demonstrates, I quote, that sound has become a social value. And he argues that, and I quote again, perception was determined by interactions between an active consciousness and historical social environments, end of quote. Following this idea, I believe that the ways in which musical instruments and sounds are treated in ancient Greek testimonies are indicative of a social construction of perception, and that these a priori perceptions are elaborated according to historical context, as well as according to social and cultural values. In this presentation, I will try to demonstrate that the tympanum, a large tambourine made of animal skin, is subjected to such cultural constructions of perception in ancient Greek documents. And I will also demonstrate how observing the way it is treated, more specifically in literary and iconographical sources dated from the classical era, can help reconstruct some historical facts and religious ideas, as well as a cultural perception of sounds, Greekness, and identity. Terminological research conducted in a thesaurus linguae Graecae using a search tool called Diogenes has identified the tympanum as the most frequently mentioned percussion instrument in archaic and classical literature. Apart from occurrences in epigrams and epigraphical documents, the tympanum is mentioned 23 times in literary works from this period, with at least 18 references found in texts from classical Athens. Such frequent references indicate that the instrument was relatively popular among Athenians during the classical era, particularly from the latter half of the 5th century onward. This assumption is supported by the iconographical corpus in which a tympanum, which began appearing in Dionysian scenes at the start of the 5th century BC, became a regular element of Dionysian paraphernalia at in the latter half of that century. The Beasley Archive Pottery Database does not contain any records of vases displaying the tympanum prior to 525, and only 3 examples have been documented within the period from 525 to 475. One of these examples, do you see the second? Oh, maybe from.
No, if you are, we see only the first.
Okay, now.
Yes,
do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. One of these examples presented here in the PowerPoint is found on an Attic red-figured cup showing Dionysus seated with a scepter in one hand and the cantharus in the other. 3 satyrs are facing him. The first one is pouring wine into Dionysus' vessel. The second seems to be dancing with a drinking horn in his hand. And the third one, painted from the front, plays the tympanum. Given the increasing popularity of the instrument throughout the 5th century, it is noteworthy that there are no literary or iconographic records of the instrument in Athenian sources prior to this century. One might legitimately wonder then where the instrument comes from and why it appears almost exclusively in relation to the cult of Dionysus in classical Athens, as can be inferred from the literary and iconographic sources. Table A in the handouts lists the literary passages mentioning the instrument and indicates this, the associated religious context, while Table B presents its occurrences and epigrams. And I'm sorry, the references are given in French. I didn't have the time to translate them in English. So to gain a clearer understanding of the place and role of the tympanum in classical Athens, one must consider the Athenian cultic adaptation of the Phrygian Great Mother, also known as the Mother of the Gods. Originating in Asia Minor, the cult of the Mother had spread in Ionian cities during the 6th century, reaching Athens and its surroundings by some point at the end of this century. Figurines and votive reliefs discovered on the Acropolis in the Piraeus, where a metron was located, a metron, so a temple dedicated to the Mother, and in other parts of the city indicate that the goddess was indeed venerated in Athens as early as the 6th century BC. There she was given the name Kybele, which likely derived from Kubeleia, a Phrygian toponymic epithet based on the name of a mountain in Asia Minor. The name Kybele is rarely found in available archaic and classical texts, but it helps clarify another title given to the deity, namely the Mountain Mother, whence the confusion with Rhea, the Cretan mother of Mount Ida, sometimes observed in sources. In the late 5th century, the Athenians transformed the old bouleuterion on the agora into a metron dedicated to the Mother of the Gods. The inauguration of her temple on the Agora confirms her importance in the religious life of classical Athens, but also raises the question as to whether this inauguration is concurrent with her cult becoming civic. Sorry. It is important to emphasize that the goddess is virtually absent from the literary and iconographic sources of archaic and classical Athens. At best, she receives only sparse mention in dramatic works, which makes it all the more remarkable that the temple was dedicated to her in the very center of the Agora. The goddess's cult was most likely first observed in Athens in a more private form of worship, a factor that may help account for the paucity of attestations in the surviving sources. One should also keep in mind that religious life in ancient Greece, and especially in a multicultural city like Athens, was highly polymorphic and fluctuating, blending practices considered ancestral and organized by civic authorities with numerous additional practices, to borrow Robert Parker's expression, which could be new, private, demotic, foreign, and so on. Athenian figurines and votive reliefs showing the mother of the gods are quite monolithic, displaying the deity sitting on a throne, holding a fial in one hand and a great tympanum in the other, with a lion resting on her lap. The tambourine is definitely the predominant instrument of her cult in the Attic area, as one can deduce from plastic arts as well as literature. Many mother figurines in Niskoi, such as the second image on the PowerPoint, were discovered in Athens and resemble more ancient Niskoi of a mountain mother found in Phrygia and throughout Ionian cities. This supports the theory that the Athenian mother of the gods is an Anatolian import. Ancient Greek testimonies describe the mother as an ecstatic foreign deity, originating from Phrygia and sometimes Lydia, who inhabits mountainous and wild regions and is frequently accompanied by ferocious roaring lions and other wild beasts. Such a description is evident in the Homeric hymn to the mother of the gods, provided on the handout. This is the first example in table C. As indicated in the hymn, the mother delights in the clashing of crotala and tympana, the deep booming of oloi, the cries of wild animals, and other natural sounds. This chaotic and thunderous soundscape evokes ecstatic music. Indeed, it has been shown that such music is typically characterized by a booming resonance, loud reverberations, unintelligible cries, and harsh, even violent noise. In a fragment from Diogenes of Athens, a 5th century tragic author, Phrygian girls then dance and make a din for kybele by using tympana, rhomboi, and clashing cymbals. This is the second example on the handout in table C. The feminine plural participle bremusas, derived from bremo, effectively conveys the resonant and percussive ambience created by the young woman in their veneration of the goddess. The verb bremo and its derivatives refer to various rumbling sounds, especially those of nature, such as thunder, wind, or waves crashing. But when used in association with musical instruments, it usually refers to the loud, rumbling ecstatic music they produce. Let us now return to Dionysus and his connection to the tympanum and the mother of the gods. Dionysus is often depicted as an ecstatic deity in ancient testimonies, especially those. Sorry, I'm just especially those associated with Menads, and has been the subject of extensive scholarly study. Iconography frequently portrays the god alongside his female and male followers, engaging in wild music and exuberant dance. On an Attic red-figured cup dated from the first half of the 5th century, Dionysus is seated among satyrs and Menads, frenetically dancing and playing music. The Menad depicted at the center of the cup wears the characteristic Menadic paraphernalia, namely the nebrus, tyrsus, and snakes entwined in her flowing hair, and holds a leopard, thereby evoking the legendary ritual of sparagmos. This practice, carried out by Menads and satyrs during climatic moment of ecstasy, involved the dismemberment of wild animals with bare hands. In addition to the iconographic evidence, the classical literary sources addressing Menadism, though fewer in number, are no less eloquent. Euripides' Bacchae, which is the only complete literary work on the subject to have come down to us from the classical period, was composed at the end of the 5th century BC and centered on themes of Dionysian ecstasy. The tragedy recounts Dionysus' return to Thebes after a period of exile in Asia Minor, and the refusal of the Thebans, particularly of Prince Pantheus, to acknowledge the god's divinity and his Theban's origins as the son of Semele, daughter of Cadmus. The plot centers on Pantheus' gradual submission to Dionysus, culminating in his paragmus at the end of his own mother. A key Dionysian element emphasized in the tragedy is the god's fundamentally ambiguous nature. Although undeniably an ancient and authentic Greek deity, Dionysus is frequently portrayed as oscillating between divine and mortal, male and female, Greek and foreign, a fluidity that is consistently attested in Greek sources. Euripides' tragedy is also very noisy, filled with sounds, music, noises, and cries of all sorts, not to mention that Dionysus is frequently referred to as Bromios, the roaring one, a derivative of Bremo. The Epiclesis Bromios certainly alludes to Dionysus' birth, as his mother was struck by Zeus' lightning during delivery, but also highlights the noisy and ecstatic nature of the god. To please their god, the chorus of Lydian women creates sounds with tympana, accompanied by screams, rumblings, and music, while emphasizing the alien nature of the practices, music, and dances instituted by the god. At the end of the first episode, Bromios asks his Lydian woman to take their Phrygian tympana, invented by him and Mother Rhea, who is often confused with the Phrygian Great Mother in sources, as I said previously, and to make a din. This is the third example in Table C. And the first chorale song, which goes from line 64 to 177, and of which you have 3 excerpts on the handout, emphasizes the close relation among Dionysus, the Phrygian mother, and her deep booming instrument, namely her barubromos tympanum, and as well as ecstatic practices, thus blurring the Greek origins of the gods and of the ritual activities it conveys by linking them to Asia Minor. There is no doubt that the Athenians recognized Dionysus as a Greek god, yet in their perceptual framework, the ecstatic rituals and the booming music that accompanied them were perceived as exotic and associated with Phrygia. In ancient music theory, the Phrygian mode was known for its capacity to induce states of ecstasy, as clearly noted by Aristotle in the Politics. This is the last example in Table C. This association contributed to framing ecstatic music as alien, or at least as not properly Greek. The tympanum, regarded by the Athenians as an exotic instrument essential for ecstatic rituals, underscores the perceived otherness of such practices. As illustrated in tables A and B of the handout, the tympanum consistently appears in literature, in Dionysian contexts, or in connection with additional or marginal religious forms. As the predominant instrument in the Attic adaptation of the cult of the mother, the tympanum serves to emphasize her Phrygian characteristics. Yet it is particularly striking that the instrument is absent from the Anatolian version of the goddess worship. By associating the tympanum with the mother, the Athenians constructed a distinctly foreign image of the deity, projecting onto her an otherness that was in fact of their own making. Following the etymological analysis of Pierre Chantraine and more recently of Robert Beekes, the term tympanon is most likely of Anatolian origin, perhaps shaping in part the perceptual framework that the Athenians constructed in their collective imagination by associating it with Phrygia. This foreign etymology reinforces the perceived alterity of the instrument in a Greek cultural context. While the tympanum became a central feature in Attic representations of ecstatic rituals, particularly in relation to the mother and of the Dionysian worship. Its non-Greek linguistic roots subtly echoed the broader tendency to associate ecstatic, loud, and bodily religious experiences with the East. Thus, the instrument, its rumbling sound, and the practices it accompanies embodies a marker of identity, highlighting the distinction Athenians drew between Greekness and otherness within their perceptual framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was very inspiring, this overview again on this Dionysiac music, and even this kind of the kind of sources that you showed. And are there any questions on this this last paper? Yes, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you very much. Could you briefly elaborate on Anatolian linguistic origin for the tympanon, as contrasted to related to the West Semitic top found with the Phoenicians or the Hebrews?
Did you hear the question by Stefan Hagel? Maybe
I heard part of it. I'm sorry.
yes.
I know it's online. It's not very.
Yeah, Can you hear me now? Does this work?
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah. Thank you. I was wondering about that linguistic relation to Anatolian languages, as opposed to the stem of top or tov that we find in Hebrew or Phoenician, where connected also to the frequent Phoenician Cypriot depiction of tympana.
Okay, so you're asking where the there are two different hypotheses regarding the term tympanum. This is what you mentioned. Okay. I should see again my sources, but Robert Beekes, there is an hypothesis that it could come from Anatolian import, but maybe a West origin could be maybe more, since there are no tympanum in a representation of the goddess in Anatolian version. Maybe it could coincide with the fact that the term and the instrument is not from the East after all, or and it is Eastern origins are more due to a construction perception of elaborated by the Athenians. So regarding etymology, different hypotheses may exist, but there are no other proof, to my knowledge, of the tympanum in Eastern versions of the worship of the goddess. So maybe it would explain that, and why the instrument is connected to Eastern practices in Athenians' perception was maybe because it was a percussion instrument. We know that percussion instruments are not very valued. I mean, there are no mention of it in philosophical works, or there are not instruments very present in sources apart from iconographical sources, which is interesting. So maybe because it was unintelligible instrument, like rumbling, and maybe because of these sounding qualities, it was associated with the East. So that's That's what I can say about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I add something? And to me, it's interesting to see how these instruments, the timpana, are relatively very not often represented in the Greek iconography. Yes, there is an association very close between the Dionysiac rituals and the tympana in the literature, but in the pictures, in the vases, in the Greek vases, this is not so often. The tympanon is an instrument not so often shown.
You are right, but at the end of the 5th century BC, so around 400 BC, it appears more often.
Yes.
In symposia, in melodic scenes, as I shown, as I said, and in other Dionysian contexts. But it's true that during the 5th century, the instrument is there, but not very often depicted. But at the end of the 5th century, there is clearly a shift since the tympana appears more frequently. And this supports the theory that the tympanum gained popularity during the 5th century and introduced more deeply the Dionysian world.
Yes, yes. The Dionysiac iconography is it changes a lot at the beginning, at the end of the 5th century, beginning of 4th century, and you have the idea of a kind of artificial construction about the tympana, I think, because it suddenly appears at the end of 5th century, and you don't, yes. Just to say that your reflection, your research on this is very interesting. Thank you. I don't know if there are any question on this last paper. Maybe not. So I think that you can thank Sandra Fleury and. So I think that we can Sharunas, maybe you can come here. You can close.
Yes. So if there are no questions or remarks anymore, I think we can leave this for later discussions. And I want to thank everybody for coming, for participating. Also the organizing committee, Migle and Matteo, for helping us these 3 days. Adaiva Mitrolevichuti, our partner at the Palace of Grand Dukes, and all of other partners, Italian Embassy, the Italian Institute of Culture. So, and of course, thank you all for coming here today. And we hope to see you in next conferences and further collaborations. Thank you.